Oh no, Robo.
Survival horror. What comes to mind when you think of this genre of gaming? Or more importantly, which titles stand out in your mind? Resident Evil, Fatal Frame, and Clock Tower are all fine examples of the genre, and each have a devoted fan base. For me though, one series has proven to deliver more than any other, and that is Silent Hill. With its mix of story, puzzles, music, sound effects, and even that "oh my god, I cannot move fast enough to get out of here" feeling, the Silent Hill series is hard to beat in terms of sheer survival horror greatness. Few titles can instill a sense of dread and true fear like the Silent Hill series, and I'm here to tell you from personal experience that if you crave true terror, unbelievably thoughtful story, and lights off, under the covers experience, Silent Hill will not let you down. Now before we delve into the game, let's talk about what makes horror horror. There are several staples in the genre. Some are more effective than others. However, in my opinion, nothing is scarier than an icy feeling of dread and uneasiness. The things you don't see are what give you the true sense of terror. Now, many horror movies and games have lots of gore, and gore is great for slashers or monster movies. When it comes to making someone feel scared, filling the screen with blood and gore doesn't really instill fear, it creates disgust. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I enjoy many splatterfests as much as the next guy, but when I want to be truly terrified, geysers of blood just don't cut it. As I said before, true fear comes from what you don't see, more than what you do see. Hearing a faint whispering in the dark and not knowing where it's coming from will always bother me more than like a demon vampire baby jumping out of a closet. Yeah, jump scares are okay, but they are utilized to give you a quick jump, making you think that you're scared more than you really are. Imagine you're walking into a room that's run down, rusted, and condemned. There's no sound, just you and your imagination. It sounds simple, and it is, but you can't help but feel like something is off. Something isn't sitting well, and you're not quite sure what to make of it. Then you hear footsteps running back and forth above your head and then faintly disappear. No explanation, it just happens. And you're left with your own thoughts to sort it out for yourself. Even then, you still might not find the answer. This is what Silent Hill is all about. Well, actually, there's a great deal more to it than that, but the essence of what makes Silent Hill scary lies therein. For this review, we're going to be focusing on my personal favorite entry in the Silent Hill series, Silent Hill 2. Now, all of the titles in the series, namely 1 through 4, have their own merits. I'm planning on covering each of these games in detail, but this is the one I'm starting with. Now, some of you might be complaining that I'm not starting with the first game. Well, sorry. This is the game that sticks out in my mind the most, and in my opinion is the best in the series. I will, however, be covering Silent Hill 1 and 3 back to back. If you're a fan of the series already, then you'll know why. No spoilers.
Ha ha!
Hey, wait!
Now, let's dive into the story of Silent Hill 2. Without giving too much away, I'll try to give the best rundown of the premise as possible. You play as James Sunderland. James has come to Silent Hill looking for his wife, Mary. He received a letter in the mail from her asking him to meet her in their special place in Silent Hill. Now here's where things start to get weird. Mary's dead. She's been dead for 3 years. James, surprisingly not as horrified as he should be, ends up giving into curiosity and heads into the fog-laden town to find her, against his better judgment. Along the way, James encounters strange creatures and debatably even stranger people. It's up to the player to guide James through this nightmare and solve the mystery. Not your average game protagonist, James doesn't have any military training or special skills. He's not an ace with a handgun or even proficient with a wooden plank. He's just an average, everyday kind of guy. He's seemingly just as vulnerable as anyone else. This is one of the first things you'll notice with your journey into Silent Hill 2. The protagonist is a wuss. Not completely useless, but not the kind of guy you'd want backing you up in a fight. This complements the direction that the developers are pointing you toward. They want you to feel helpless and anxious when you walk into another dark room or corridor. Playing as this guy, yeah, you'll feel it. Another reason Silent Hill 2 succeeds in providing that chill factor that most other survival horror games lack is its atmosphere. I would say that the mansion and the original Resident Evil comes close to this, but Silent Hill 2's locations are far more disturbing and instill that sense of fear that I mentioned earlier. You begin the game in a wooded area, and then find your way into the main town. You'll notice that the town of Silent Hill is enshrouded in constant fog. The buildings and local businesses all have that derelict look to them. You can tell that no one has been to the town in a long, long time. Cars are left abandoned in the street covered in rust, and windows are mostly grayed out with old signs sitting behind them. Silent Hill is not an inviting place to be, and still these outside locations don't hold a candle to what you'll find inside. The first main building that you'll enter is an abandoned apartment building. I still remember the first time I played the game and made it to this location. It's dark, it's quiet, and it's full of horrors that are just waiting to get to you. The game has many dark and horrifying locations like this, such as an old hospital and the Lakeview Hotel. All of the locations are unique, yet still share that run-down, dilapidated look. They are designed to make you feel alone in the dark, and they succeed in every sense. The apartment building, however, is the location that stands out to me the most, mostly because of a first encounter with a certain enemy that absolutely terrified me on my first encounter with him. Silent Hill fans absolutely know who I'm referencing, but more on that later. Later in the apartment, you'll receive a flashlight. Now this is a useful tool, and it's absolutely necessary for most of the game's dark environments. Even with this extra light, you'll still feel uneasy every time you enter a new room. I'd even go as far as to say it makes things even more intense when you walk into a room and hear something coming towards you, while you're scrambling trying to illuminate it with your flashlight to take it down. Speaking of useful tools, you'll also receive a small hand radio earlier in the game. Now this item is a staple of the franchise, and it emits static when enemies are near. Again, this is an item that is supposed to help you, but it also serves another purpose: scaring the ever-loving crap out of you. Walking around a dark hallway and then hearing the static on your radio start to get louder and louder makes me super nervous. I can recall several times where I felt the hairs on my neck stand on end just because I could hear the static and knew something was close. This was such an ingenious idea on the part of the developers. Now, let's talk about the gameplay. Most of the items you'll find in Silent Hill are your standard fare for just about any type of game. You'll find weapons like a wooden plank for close melee attacks, as well as various firearms such as a handgun, shotgun, and hunting rifle. The difficulty level you choose from the start of the game will have an effect on how much ammo you'll be able to find. Either way, ammo is fairly scarce, and you'll want to conserve it as much as possible. When you first pick up the handgun in the apartment, you might find it best to hold off on using it until you find an adequate amount of ammo. If not, you'll find yourself switching between it and your wooden plank often, which will add more stress than you need. Silent Hill 2 is already stressful enough when you're working on building up enough courage just to walk into another room. You might not want to add more stress on top of it. The firearms are useful, with expectedly increasing levels of stopping power. The handgun deals out low damage. The shotgun deals low to moderate depending on your distance from the intended target, and the hunting rifle is moderate to high damage, also depending on your distance. Later in the game, the enemies become a bit tougher to deal with, so you'll want to stick to your firearms for most of these encounters. This is why ammo conservation plays an important role in the game. If you don't have the ammo to spare, take out a lesser foe with a melee attack. You'll be glad you did later. There is no HUD in the game at all, so you won't be able to see how many rounds you have left unless you pause the game to check your inventory. Removing the HUD was a great move, as it removes any distraction to what you're experiencing on screen and keeps you immersed in the game. Still, it also means that you'll have to play smart and keep an eye on your inventory. You'll also find health items such as health drinks and first aid kits. Don't worry, you won't have to mix any herbs for desired effects here, just the basics. As I said before, there is no HUD on the screen, so you won't be able to see any indication of how much health you have. One great feature that was added was a vibration indicator for the controller. When your health starts to get low, you'll feel a slow, heartbeat-like vibration in your hands. This means you need to stop and check your health. Since there is no autosave feature in the game, you'll want to keep an eye on this even if you don't feel the vibration. Some enemies can take you out rather quickly and you won't even have time to think about it. This is another great way to keep the player on edge. If you were able to just pick right up from where you died, it wouldn't create the same feeling of tension or nervousness. Knowing that you're about to enter a recently unlocked room and remembering that you haven't saved the game in a while, that can put you on edge. It makes you careful, and that's the intention here.
Now, is there anything negative to say about this game? Not really. Well, to be honest, it's hard for me to knock against this game because I love it so much, but I should try my best to be objective. The controls are my biggest issue with the game. Now, they aren't necessarily bad, but just can be a bit clunky and unresponsive at times. Now, I'm in the camp that regards this as a plus in some ways because it ramps up the intensity of the game. If it controlled fast and flawlessly as some other third-person games like Gears of War, it would turn into an action game and wouldn't be nearly as intense. However, taking off my rose-colored glasses, I have to say there were some instances where it was more annoying than it should have been. Most of these instances happened during combat. Shooting feels good enough with decent lock-on assistance, but melee combat can be a bit wonky. Most of my issues happen when I tried to stomp on a downed enemy to take it out for good. In most cases, you have to be in a perfect spot next to the enemy to perform the stomp, and sometimes you'll get right next to it and press the action button, but James will just stand there while the enemy gets back up and you have to waste more bullets. Another issue is, surprise surprise, the camera. Sometimes you'll walk into a room and the camera will go to an angle that gives you practically no line of sight. If an enemy is approaching, you won't know from where or how many there are until you realign the camera. Again, it's not always a bad thing and sometimes it can cause a bit more tension, but it's still something that, had it been tweaked a bit more, could have enhanced the overall experience. That's honestly about all I have to say negatively about the game. There's just so much here to love and admire that you'd be hard-pressed to think of many points against it. Moving on. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Earlier in the review, I mentioned a particular enemy featured in the game that made me want to curl up in my bed and weep like a little girl. I don't think it'll be any surprise to fans of the series that it's this guy. That's right, boys and girls. Pyramid Head. Or Red Pyramid. Or whatever other names people have used for him. Wait, really? Really? Alright, moving along. This terrifying monstrosity shows up at some key moments in the game, and let me tell you, without spoiling anything, he was my first real scare during my initial playthrough. Hell, he still scares me. Now there's no jumping out or huge audio keys, just a disturbing moment. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking about Pyramid Head now and get back to it, but seriously, just look at this dude. Yeah, enjoy your nightmares. Silent Hill 2's story is leaps and bounds beyond most other stories in video games. I've played through Silent Hill 2 several times over the past decade, and the story still pulls me into its dark atmosphere and themes. It doesn't shy away from telling a complex tale that will leave you scratching your head if you're not ready to analyze it. The story is so deep that I always seem to come away from another playthrough with new bits of information that ultimately alters my interpretation. That's the beauty of it all. There's no clear-cut answer, but all of the pieces are there for you to put together yourself.
All I want from you is an answer. It doesn't matter who I am. I'm here for you, James. See? I'm real.
Now, I'm not the type to ruin the experience, so I won't be spoiling anything for you. I do have many interpretations of the story and the endings, so perhaps it won't be out of the question to do a video of just a story analysis for those of you who want to skip playing the game or just want to know my opinion. But honestly, there is no reason to skip this game if you're a fan of survival horror. If you're a fan of gaming in general, you owe it to yourself to experience it. Make no mistake, this game is a masterpiece through and through. The game has been released for several platforms, so there are many ways to experience it. It was first released in September of 2001 on the PlayStation 2, followed by an extended version called Restless Dreams for the Xbox in December of the same year. The Xbox version is nearly identical, but it contains a bonus campaign where players can get a little more insight into the plot. Recently, the game was also released for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 as part of the Silent Hill HD collection. This version contains updated HD graphics, as well as the Restless Dreams extended campaign from the Xbox version, so getting your hands on a copy shouldn't be a problem. Well, that's it for this review. Now it's time to kick off your shoes, turn off the lights, turn up the sound, and be prepared to enter a nightmare that you'll never wake up from. In a good way.
In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place, waiting for you.